We've just wrapped up Citizenship Week, a chance to take a good look at the pros and cons of where we are and who we are as Canadians. Although immigration and citizenship are different topics, almost all of us owe our status as Canadians to the fact of immigration. If Canada's cultural mosaic is in a state of constant change, the pace of that change may soon be altered by new economic and social realities. I'm Phyllis Bennett. Welcome to Inquiry. Joining me to discuss imminent changes in Canada's citizenship and immigration rules are Pat O'Brien, the Liberal Member of Parliament for London Middlesex. Mr. O'Brien, if you had to tell us what the biggest change is, what is it?
Well, Phyllis, I think the most important thing right now is the national review of our immigration policies that we've undertaken as a government. We want to hear from Canadians on this important topic. But in terms of rule changes, the emphasis on family reunification and also an increase in the number of people coming into Canada with marketable labor skills.
And Roderick Beaujeau, who's a sociologist at the University of Western Ontario. Mr. Beaujeau, how well do immigrants fit into our society?
Especially when we compare ourselves to other countries, I think we can be quite proud as a society as the extent to which immigrants fit in. Of course, there's much diversity there, and in fact, there's some immigrants who come at the top of the scale, others who come at the bottom. I think this diversity is a good thing too, because if all immigrants come at the top, then there'd be resentment. If people come at the bottom, then there'd be ghettos formed. This diversity that takes a variety of forms is a good thing in terms of the ability of immigrants to fit in.
And London immigration lawyer Michael Lobach. Mr. Lobach, have you got concerns as an immigration lawyer about the changes that may be coming down the pike?
I think the directions are basically healthy. I think you have to understand when Mr. O'Brien talks about family reunification, though the government appears to be talking about immediate family reunification, the government is making it easier and faster to get your dependents to Canada, but it's now more difficult to get your extended family to Canada, and that's where the independent workers come in. The Refugee Board, I think, right now is going through some positive changes. They seem to be taking the political element out of the Refugee Board and making it more streamlined and more efficient, and that's good.
And Tom Donovan, who's the coordinator of settlement services for London's Cross-Cultural Learner Centre. Mr. Donovan, have you got worries about what's coming?
Well, we certainly look towards the new government to see what kind of policies they're going to look at implementing. I guess from our perspective, we'd like to see a greater commitment to numbers of people, refugees, to be allowed into the country, and the kinds of supports that will be developed for them as well.
Citizenship, immigration, and change. We'll be right back. Mr. O'Brien, we've had a recent poll that says 53% of Canadians think we're accepting too many immigrants, and only 37% say what's happening now is fine. As someone who's in government, does this concern you?
Well, it does, Phyllis, and I quite understand it. It's nothing new. We're in fairly tough economic times, hopefully pulling out of those tough economic times, but one can look at our history, and when we've gone through a difficult economic period, that's been a common reaction. There's a tendency to say, well, we can't even employ Canadians, so why are we taking in more immigrants?
So why are we?
Well, that's an excellent question, and our answer is take a look at what we said during the election campaign. We're going to be a government that's going to try very hard to live up to what we said we would do, and our Red Book commitment was 1%, or about 250,000 immigrants, and that is exactly what our minister announced, and in a democratic election, Canadians elected this government, and that was one of our commitments.
But that really doesn't answer the question about why, if we can't employ the people we've got, why are we bringing more in?
Well,
I mean, I know you've promised it, but why?
Well, in a practical vein, I'm glad to answer that. There's a misconception that immigrants take away Canadians' jobs, and that is absolutely ridiculous. Quite frankly, studies will show that immigrants create as much employment as, if anything, it's at worst neutral. In other words, a lot of immigrants will come in and will become small business people very quickly. One need only go around to some of the mom and pop stores in town and to notice how many are run by immigrants and employing 1 or 2 or 3 Canadians born here, so that there are some misconceptions around the issue of employment and immigration.
Mr. Beaujeau, does that jibe with what you found in your studies? Do they create jobs? How well do they fit in initially in terms of where they stand economically, and how well do they fit in after a period of time?
Oh, clearly the immigrants have more difficulty at the beginning. That is, that their average incomes are significantly lower than the average incomes of others with the same age and education at the beginning. But once they've been here in Canada for 5-10 years, the average incomes are really quite comparable. I think that the research that Pat O'Brien is referring to with regard to immigration and unemployment is quite well established, that there's really no relationship there between these two phenomena. The most recent report on that we have is from the Economic Council of Canada, and that's basically their conclusion on that. And thus it was following on that kind of research that the most recent recession didn't do what previous recessions had done, which was to lower immigration during the recession. So we've stayed with our theory and our past research and stayed the course in this most recent recession.
Mr. Donovan, that must be a concern to you about what appears to be the perception of Canadians that, in bad economic times you should close the doors, regardless of what the statistics say. Do you find that happening? I mean, you're with the Cross Cultural Learner Centre.
It's an attitude that we deal with on a daily basis, actually, and that you hear all the time. There's often a lot of pointing the finger or blaming at refugees and or immigrants for taking away possibilities or jobs for Canadian-born people. And that's a misconception, as has been said, and it seems to be a byproduct of difficult economic times. We tend to focus primarily and solely, I guess, in my belief, on the economic perspective when you're dealing with this, the issue of refugee and immigrants, and there's also other parts to the equation with that as well. I mean, there's a moral and an ethical component in looking at people and what's happening globally and what people are experiencing, and to have a sense of I guess, in my own opinion, accountability as a country who has a lot to be able to assist other countries and individuals within those countries who are having difficulties.
Well, now, are you satisfied at the breakdown that we have of Mr. O'Brien's 250,000? We have, I gather, 28,000 refugees, 111,000 family class immigrants, and almost 111,000 economically independent immigrants. Now, are those the people who come in with a lot of cash and buy a Canadian?
That's correct. And so if you find that the number, if you're putting it in context, the number of people who are coming in as refugees, which I think your stats were saying was about 28,000, in relation to the 250,000, I mean, it's a very small percentage. And you find that the majority of immigrants who come through do have substance, have money, who stimulate the economy and assist us in that prospect.
Mr. Lobeck, you're an immigration lawyer. What kind of immigrants end up at your door? I gather you're fighting the government bureaucracy when they come, they want to stay, and people are trying to get rid of them. Is that it, or what happens with you?
Oh, I tend to focus on refugee claimants, people who come to Canada and claim refugee status, claim asylum here.
And how is the system working? How do you feel it's working? Are we being just to refugees?
I think it's working a lot better than it used to work. It's a lot faster. It's a lot less arbitrary, and I think the quality of the appointments of the Refugee Board is going up. The expertise is going up, so that I'm pleased generally with the direction of the Refugee Board and our internal process for assessing claims. I think there's still some significant administrative problems that exist, and the government is extremely difficult, extremely harsh on failed refugee claimants, and I'm constantly seeing people who've established themselves well here, who've become married, have families here, still being asked to leave. There's no sense to this policy. I hope this new government will change that kind of policy. And it's also the process of dealing with failed claimants and asking them to leave and finding a place for them to go is really snagged badly and causing all kinds of social and I think economic problems for people, and that's something the government has got to deal with.
Mr. O'Brien, what about that?
Well, excuse me, thank you, Phyllis. What Mr. Lobeck said is certainly a concern, and our government intends to address it. The whole question of refugees, I think Canadians are a generous people, and we want to do our share to help true refugees. But, you know, I can tell you as a member of Parliament for just some few months now, there are people who, as Mr. Loback knows, there are people who falsely claim refugee status. I obviously can't discuss.
Is it a big proportion?
Well, no. Fortunately, it's not a big proportion. But to me, I get annoyed when anybody falsely claims refugee status. I get annoyed when someone comes to my constituency office and lies to my constituency workers. Unfortunately, that does happen. It gives a bad name to those who are true refugees, and those are the kind of people Canadians want to help. The Somali warlord wife, that whole fiasco. Those few bad incidents give a bad name to true refugees.
But I would agree in terms of what gets focused on, or maybe some very exceptional cases, I think, and kind of media, sensationalized cases, and we ignore or forget or don't focus or talk about the millions of refugees who have come to Canada, who are very respectable, who are very responsible citizens at this point in time, who have contributed to the country as we are today.
Does that make your job harder when you have a high-profile case such as this hitting the news? Does that tar every refugee with the same brush?
It certainly does, to a certain extent, because I think guilt by association and people are forced to work within and deal with a system that portrays them as being guilty until proven innocent. So there's a lot of negative repercussions that people face as a result of that.
I'd like to take issue with Mr. O'Brien's comment about the
If
Somali
we could have it
claim.
briefly, we're about to hit a commercial break, but go ahead.
Just about Mrs. Aidid, I think he's talking about, and I don't think there's an iota of evidence that Mrs. Aidid was a false claimant. She came here in 1989. At that time, her husband's faction in Somalia had no power whatsoever, and I'm certain she was a legitimate refugee, and she was judged to be a legitimate refugee. She then became a permanent resident. After that, her husband established some power in Somalia, and now I think there's an issue of who should be responsible for this person. Should she be taking social benefits? But there's no proof whatsoever that she was a false claimant.
Maybe we can do a little bit more of discussion on that, but first we're going to have to take a break, and we'll be right back. Mr. O'Brien, you were trying to clarify something.
Yeah, thanks, Phyllis. On Mr. Loback's point about Mrs. Aidid, I was careful to say that if she had broken some of our rules, I really don't know. I just know what I've read in the media. I know it was a media football, you know, and the public was very concerned about it. But the point I'm trying to make, and as Mr. Donovan acknowledged, these are the ones that get the attention. But if any refugee claimant is breaking the rules of Canada, I think, frankly, that they have given up their opportunity to come into this country. And as an MP, I'm simply sharing with you that, unfortunately, a small percentage of cases do come to my office, and they lie to my workers. And I wish we could emphasize more the success stories and the true immigrants and refugees who come to this country and do so well.
What about the refugee who comes to Canada, becomes a landed immigrant, and something then turns up that this person shouldn't be here? I mean, once they're a landed immigrant, Mr. Loback, can we get rid of them easily, or is it a tough? My perception is it's pretty tough to get them out of the country if they turn out to be not what they said they were when they came in.
It's more difficult to get rid of them. If they have established permanent resident status, then they have extra appeal powers, but it's certainly possible to take away their status by way of proving that they were false in the first place, or if they commit a serious crime, they can still be asked to leave. Those are the two principal ways they can lose.
Mr. Beaujeu, is this a big problem or not? I mean, we were talking, these are the ones that get focused on, obviously, but, you know.
Well, there is a lot of pressure on our refugee system because there's so many seeking to come from outside, and so there's bound to be a difficult process that a number of countries like Canada are going through to try to figure out which ones to admit. I think there's a sense of generosity towards true refugees, but at the same time there's a concern that these systems are not to be abused. But with so much pressure from the outside, it is a difficult thing to establish a screening device involving so many people that will not cause various kinds of problems.
Now, you spoke earlier about having people coming in at the top of the economic ladder and people coming in at the bottom of the economic ladder, and that was important. I mean, have we got the right breakdown here with what the government has been doing with its breakdown?
Well, one good way to look at the breakdown is in terms of the classes of immigrants. And as we saw from the presentations earlier, there's some people speaking for each class. There's obviously a number of people speaking for the economic class, that way that immigrants can make contributions soon after they arrive, especially if they're business class, they bring in money. Then a number of people are arguing for the family class and would like to expand it even further, larger definitions of what includes the family. And a number of people want us to be generous and to do our share with regard to refugees. And so that puts a lot of pressure on the system there as well in terms of each of these moving in an upward direction. And achieving a balance between these three is a difficult political venture, especially because the family class arrives without any check. That is, as long as they qualify, they can come.
What do you mean with if you qualify? If your Aunt Frida's here, then you can come? Is that
as long as you're a spouse or a child of a dependent below a certain age, as long as you're a parent above a certain age, you know, basically check those things and check your health a little bit, and you can come. So there's no screening device for the family class. So that brings in already well over 100,000 per year. So that to achieve a balance, one needs the other classes to be higher in order to have somewhat comparable to this family class.
But there is an economic perspective in that component, in that the person who is sponsoring a family member needs to accept financial responsibility for that person for a certain length of time. So that plays a factor in that as well.
We're seeing some fees being imposed that were not imposed before for landed immigrant status and that sort of thing. Now, is that going to make it more difficult, I would guess, for refugees to bring over?
And refugee claimants, yes.
How much would those fees be, Mr. Bryan? Any idea?
I don't know. I was at a committee meeting yesterday, Phyllis, as a stand-in for another MP, and I heard the number $150 to a refugee claimant. Certainly we don't want to be punitive with this, but that would be an extremely small part of the cost, as my colleagues here know, of trying to process that
Perhaps
case.
a very large cost to a refugee.
Fair enough. That's a fair comment. And I think where that is an impossible cost to a refugee claimant, there ought to be an appeal process. But for many people who claim refugee status, it might not be a problem. And I think that Canadians recognize the economic reality that we're in right now. And while we want to be generous and take in true refugees, if they can afford to help defray the cost in some minuscule way, I don't have a problem with asking them. If they cannot afford to make that contribution, then perhaps we've got to set it aside.
I think that, I guess in my experience, we find that the vast majority of refugee claimants do not have the economic means to be able to pay any kind of administrative fee for that process. I mean, the counterbalance is that they're saying that people might be allowed to work at this point in time, but there are other things to consider. Health care, for example, which is not going to be extended to people. So there's going to be other added benefits that people will have to pay extra out of their own pockets in order to try and establish the minimum standard of quality of life that we all have here. So that $150, and I'd actually heard it was a little higher, around the $500 mark, but I'm just, again, is going to be a penalty.
And this is still in the works.
It's in the works, and that's the number I heard yesterday in Ottawa, but again, as Mr. Donovan says, I'm not sure. Quite frankly, there could be a range depending, based on the ability of the person to pay. But I don't think it's something that this government is going to hang its immigration policy on. It's an attempt, though, to recognize the fact that it's expensive to process immigrants and refugees and make them, help them enter Canadian society. It's expensive to the Canadian taxpayer. It's something we believe in as a government. Where there are legitimate ways to help defray that cost, even in a minimal way, we're going to look at them. But certainly I can't imagine our government making that a stumbling block for a person trying to become a Canadian citizen.
Well, I have a stumbling block here, and that's that we're going to have to take a break. We'll be right back. Mr. Lobeck, what about this issue of fees? It's not just the fee for your landed immigrant status, is it? I mean, you were speaking the break, you've got other concerns about them.
Oh, there's 30 or 40 different services that have fees charged to them, and as I have seen the release, I think there's generally an average of about 25% increase in the fees. And I think that it's fairly substantial in some cases. One good example of a waiver is a refugee claimant who's just started his claim in Canada is now entitled again to work. The new minister has opened them up for work permits again, and those people don't have to pay a fee. But after some time, if their claim has failed and they have started an appeal, which would usually be about 6 months down the line, they can still work, but then they have to pay. So maybe that's a sensible balance, I don't know, but it'll no doubt cause hardship in certain cases.
Mr. Bourgeot, what about that?
I was looking at the release here that says that the aim is to save some $48 million through various kinds of fees and changes to the services. Notice that this is a very small amount of money. It comes to about $5 per taxpayer, I guess. And if we want to be generous towards refugees, why don't we allow our taxes to go up? I mean, that would be a good way of indicating the generosity of Canadians.
What about that, Mr. O'Brien?
Well, I can tell Mr. Bourgeot is not a member of Parliament or seeking to be one. The Canadians just can't bear. If there's one message we got loud and clear coast to coast to coast, is that we're taxed to death. We just can't bear more taxes. And given, frankly, the value, the questionable value of some Canadians to immigration, I don't share that. That you would hear the wails and the cries, you'd hear them all the way to Ottawa. No, Mike said the key point. We're trying to find a balance between the cost of welcoming people into Canada as immigrants or legitimate refugees and asking them to help to defray that cost. We are asking all Canadians right across the board to do more, economically to do more at this time, as you saw in our new budget. And I don't think it's fair, it's unfair, I don't think there's anything unrealistic about looking at this area of immigration and refugees and seeing if they can do more. If it's impossible for these people to contribute financially, as I said earlier, I don't think our government would make that a stumbling block.
Certainly, I agree that if a person is able to contribute financially in that manner, that I'm all for that, then helps with the accountability. But I would also like to see a very clear mechanism or route to be able to deal with situations or individuals who are unable to pay the fee.
I'd like to put this cost in a broader sense. That is that there are costs here, not only for refugees, but for immigration more generally. They're typically in the short term, and yet no one is really willing to pick these up. The immigrants who come to Ontario, supposedly Ontario ultimately benefits from them, and so the federal government is saying, well, Ontario should pay the cost at the beginning too, if it's going to benefit at the end. And yet, with all this discussion of the social program review, we're trying to offload the costs on someone else, on the user, on the different level of government. I think we should more willingly face those costs and say maybe that the immigration is too high for the amount of expenditure that we want to spend on immigration. And thus, if we're not willing to pay these costs, either by the user or by the federal level or by the provincial level or by the taxpayer, then we should simply reduce immigration. I mean, we should face those questions.
Which is what Reform has proposed, Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, Reform has proposed some pretty severe limitations on immigration. You will never see me come on your show, Phyllis, and defend the Reform Party's platform. I simply don't agree with their appeal. Quite frankly, I think that they're appealing to in some cases, they're appealing to the worst sentiments among Canadians.
Inquiry, bringing people and issues together. Join us again next week.